He moved with a measured calm that did not erase the tremor inside me. He took my statement, wrote smoothly in a notebook, asked me to point out the image on the television. The screen still flashed the same paused picture. He frowned and reached for the remote, then stopped and asked the clerk to turn off the power at the outlet. They yanked the plug, and the room returned to dark. The image vanished like it had never been there. "That's not good," Officer Rodriguez said, not theatrically, only with the kind of flat assessment that translates as a concern not yet shaped into a plan. "We'll run the hotel's logs and see if anything on their system could have sent it. Any cameras in the parking lot? Anybody loitering?" I tried to tell him about the men at the gas station, their manner, the way one of them had asked where I was staying. Rodriguez asked for details, made his notes, and told me they would check traffic cameras near the gas station and canvass the area for that car. He gave me a card. "If you get more messages like that, save them and don't delete anything," he said. "And if you see the car again, call us immediately." I did what he asked. I screenshot the texts. I saved the number, an 11-digit string that popped up as unknown, and then blank if someone later blocked it. I tried calling it out of a stubborn hope it would be some kid screwing around, but the line went straight to voicemail. When I listened to the recording, my stomach dropped. There was no message, only the faint hum of carrier equipment. Someone had sent 2 messages and then vanished into the silence, like a shape slipping through a wall. The next day I tried to find the seller, Ethan, to ask questions that might make me feel less ridiculous. Maybe I could get him to explain the photograph. Maybe it was a mistake, a prank that would dissolve under daylight. I called the number he'd given, and it went straight to voicemail. I messaged the account and got a short, polite reply. "Sorry, that TV should have been fine. Hope you like it." That afternoon, a man in the parking lot of a discount grocery store watched me from the other side of his car for longer than comfort allowed. He let the grocery cart roll away, fingers drumming on the steering wheel, and when our eyes met briefly, his look slid off me like a stone skimming water. I went home, which at that point meant moving to another motel that night, and called my mother. I told her I'd had a bad day selling and buying electronics, and she told me to come home. I didn't have the gas. I told her I'd be careful. I pictured her face, the way worry folds into small lines around the eyes, and I felt both guilty and absurd. 2 nights later, the TV came on again from nowhere. This motel was different, newer carpet, a cleaner smell, but the result was the same. A photograph appeared, me in the fluorescent light at the gas station again, the angle slightly different, but unmistakably taken at the same moment. My elbow was tucked weirdly, my expression caught between resignation and concentration. The photograph was closer, as if the phone had zoomed in. I could see the texture of my skin, the way the light hit the scar near my eyebrow I'd gotten falling off a bike when I was 15. The image was intimate. It carried a breach so small and private that it made my skin crawl. I called Officer Rodriguez again. He came back with a detective this time. They took fingerprints from the TV's casing, they logged the motel's internal camera footage, they wrote down the descriptions of cars in the lot. They were methodical. They were limited. The detective said all the right phrases. "We'll investigate. We'll canvass the meeting places. We'll check the cell tower pings if we can." And each phrase carried a quiet possibility that in my head grew a long list of what they could not find. They had limited resources. There were a dozen other cases. Evidence dissolves. Lines go cold. The detective was frank and kind. "We can try," she said. "Sometimes we get lucky. Sometimes the trail runs dry. The important thing is your safety. She suggested I check my social accounts for privacy gaps, change my passwords, put locks on my accounts that used my phone number. I did those things, mechanically, like someone washing their hands after touching something sticky. I could not sleep. I checked the peephole, the seams of the door, the vents I had told myself were only for air. Every small sound in the night, the AC kicking on, a truck idling down the road, became a code I tried with frantic intelligence to decrypt. My breathing took on a new rhythm. It felt like a metronome that marked the sections of a day I could no longer take for granted. When the TV was off, its black face reflected me like a window. I would stare at that reflection and imagine eyes pressed on the other side. The screen became both barrier and breach. Months later, I learned that the photo had been posted in small forums where people bragged about good scores on classified exchanges. A username I could not tie to a real person had uploaded a few images from around the gas station. A steering wheel with a coffee stain, a pair of shoes beside a curb, and one, cropped strangely, of me holding a television box. That feeling of being watched had a trail, but not a name. The photos were relics of commerce and predation, evidence of attention that did not belong to my life. I moved, not dramatically. I rented a room in a friend's spare bedroom for a while, installed a small lock on the bedroom door, and bought a cheap door jammer. I started meeting people for exchanges in crowded cafes and made a rule to bring a friend whenever possible. I bought a small camera to watch my door when I was sleeping. I started leaving the TV unplugged in hotel rooms unless I needed it. Panic had become a habit. So had precaution. At first, people around me tried to reduce it.
Guia de estilo e instruções para síntese de fala. Você é narrador, palestrante com voz potente, forte e autoritária. O tom deve ser firme e inabalável. A frase anterior era: At first, people around me try to reduce it. Você está no meio de uma frase, pensamento. Mantenha o ritmo e a força vocal sem quebrar a conexão. Haja como se estivesse transmitindo uma verdade fundamental. At first, people around me try to reduce it. You're being paranoid, one coworker said, kindly and with a smile that did not know the shape of fear. My mother wanted me to stop traveling entirely. Mark bristled when I asked him to come with me to a meeting. He'd had enough of my sudden demands on his time. The isolation gnawed at me. There is a social cost to vigilance. Friends get tired, family grows nervous, and you can't ask the whole world to live in the tension you feel. There were other episodes. A burner number that called and hung up 3 times in a row at dawn. A car that appeared in the parking lot outside my apartment and idled for 20 minutes. A message on a sales platform that contained an old photograph of me, taken from an angle that meant the sender had been close. Each occurrence demanded a response. Call the police, change the number, block the account. And each response cost something I couldn't tally. Sleep, peace, something like the old naive faith that strangers will be strangers and nothing more. I learned practical things. I never let someone into my car to inspect something while I sat alone. I always asked for a public meet, well lit and populated. I kept my wallet and keys in a pocket I could reach instantly. I started using a simple checklist before opening my door at night. Keys in hand, phone unlocked, emergency numbers in the top bar. I registered the odd messages with the police and kept copies. None of these actions was heroic. They were repair work, the kind you do after something breaks. In one of the quieter weeks that followed, I was in a hotel for work. I had to present at a client site the next morning, so I arrived early to go over notes. The hotel was neither expensive nor squalid, just the middle ground where business travelers live between cities. That evening, with my presentation bullets synced and my suit hanging in a plastic bag, I went down for coffee and a sandwich. The vending machine took my change and offered nothing. A woman in the corner complained into a phone with volcanic softness. Life continued in its small, indifferent loops. Back in my room, I opened the suitcase and tried to rehearse what I would say the next morning. My mind kept straying to the gas station photograph. I told myself that these things happen to other people, that I had been unlucky, that the world is large and we are mostly anonymous for the best part of it. I forced the sentences into my head like an exercise in endurance. Late, while the highway beyond the parking lot breathed like a distant animal, the TV blinked on. It was not a photograph this time. The screen showed a hallway. It was a grainy, grayscale view of a corridor that looked like the motel's own hallway. The same peeling paint and the same row of doors with numbers. For a hot second, I thought it was a prank someone at the front desk had arranged. Then the camera panned, slowly, like someone moving the lens with a cautious hand. When it swung left, the angle found my door.
The key card reader glinted. The camera stayed on my door for a long time. My body turned to stone. Every emergency plan I had rehearsed in the months since the first photograph unspooled faster than my fingers could type. I called the front desk again. The clerk answered in a voice that bordered on boredom. I told him the TV had been showing a live shot of my door. There was a flurry of noise in the background, a murmured conversation. "Sir, we don't do that," the clerk said eventually. "I can send someone." I hung up and dialed 911. "They're showing the hallway on my TV," I said, and my voice was a sound that didn't belong to me. "It's pointed at my door." They came faster this time. 2 patrol cars, tires whispering against asphalt, lights strobing without color in the damp. Officer Rodriguez arrived again, and this time he was not alone. A detective with soft eyes and the parsing patience of someone who has watched a lot of evidence slip through fingers told me calmly that they would sweep the building. They'd check the hotel's internal systems and ask the staff about recent maintenance work. They searched the vents and the light fixtures. They asked if any maintenance people had been in my room. They checked the public cameras and logged the TV's MAC address from the hotel's router, details I couldn't understand technically, but that applied to the real world like neat bandages on an injury that would not close. They found nothing physically connected to my room that would point to a camera. No device tucked into a vent, no pinhole peering through the smoke detector. But the image on the TV continued to be live for a little while longer, until they somehow severed whatever connection held it there. I know the words they used later: remote casting, unauthorized access. Those words were meant to explain without telling me how to fix the hole. I didn't want instructions on how. I wanted the hole to be gone, and the thing that knifed my privacy to be gone with it. The detective asked me about the men at the gas station again. He asked for serial numbers, descriptions of the car. He wrote more notes. He was thorough in a way that almost relieved me. "Sometimes these incidents are opportunistic," he said. "Someone has a camera, they get a feed, and they share it. Other times, someone is tracking a person. We'll look into both angles." The truth that followed was not cinematic. There was no dramatic chase, no unmasking. There was a trail that grew cold in places, phone numbers that dissolved, accounts that could not be traced without significant resources. The forum where my photo had appeared was a tiny island on the internet, written over quickly by other posts. The men who sold the TV had moved on. The quiet man in the car had no social presence that connected to the username that posted the photograph. It felt shameful, like having a wound and then being told the wound had no owner. But there were small victories.
Officer Rodriguez flagged the motel as part of an investigation. The hotel replaced some of its hardware and tightened its guest policies. I changed all my passwords, closed accounts I hadn't used in years, and set my phone to forward suspicious numbers to voicemail. I bought a smart plug for the TV and kept it unplugged when I wasn't using it. I stopped buying from strangers when I could avoid it. I learned to meet in the vestibule of the municipal library and to ask to see government-issued IDs if something felt off. None of it brought back the nights I had lost or the certainty that someone had watched me without my permission. The thing that settled into me finally was not merely fear. It was a new architecture of caution. I built my days around new thresholds, the sound of the peephole scan, the heavy press of deadbolts. Doors became symbolic. Screens were both windows and danger. I started to avoid the ease in favor of the slow, deliberate work of ensuring my privacy. Friends called me careful or uptight. They didn't get how a small image could fold the rest of your life into a single sharp corner. There are residues that linger. When a television flicks on unexpectedly now, my heart jumps. When I see a man linger near the entrance of a gas station, I cross the street. I sleep with the covers pulled to my chin and a light on the far side of the room. Sometimes, late at night, I unplug the TV and press my ear to the thick plastic casing until the hum is nothing but my own pulse. There are moments when I imagine eyes behind every glass surface and then scold myself for the thought. It's a superstition and also a strategy. A few months after the gas station photograph, a message arrived on an old sales account from a username I didn't recognize. The message contained a cropped shot of my face, taken from an angle I had never wanted anyone to see. It was a reminder more than a threat. The account was anonymous. The platform's support team took the post down when I reported it, but the image had been circulated. It's a detail that sticks. Removing the photo felt like patching a tear in a curtain, not removing the hole in the wall. I keep a folder on my phone labeled Evidence. It has screenshots, saved texts, a copy of the police report. The detective told me to keep everything. He said time and again that sometimes patterns appear. Sometimes something that seems small becomes the only thread that leads to an answer months later. For the case of the motel TV that turned on in the night, that answer never came in full. There were leads and dead ends, and then the kind of closure that sits in the drawer labeled unresolved. What changed most was not the facts of the nights or the police logs. It was the way I perceived space. Hotel rooms began to feel like temporary skins I wore. Doors and windows were thresholds between me and strangers.
It taught me to see my life as a series of thresholds that require intention, that a door is more than a door, and a screen more than a screen. Sometimes, when I pass a television store window now and see rows of screens sleeping in black glass, a childish panic rises and then falls. I look at my reflection and catch a glimpse of the person I was before the photograph, unguarded, moving through the world with a friendliness that belonged to a different economy of trust. I miss that person sometimes. I also know that I am more careful because of what I learned. The vigilance is a bitter price, but it keeps me moving. There are nights when I leave the TV off and fall asleep to the hum of the city beyond the window, and in those nights the silence feels like a promise. The rest is work, to keep records, to choose meetings carefully, to hand my details only to people who make me feel safe, and to accept that some things remain unresolved. The photograph, the messages, the hallway image, they are parts of a story that changed me. I will carry the scar, but not let it be the only thing that defines the shape of my life. If this story says anything practical, trust your instincts, meet in public, document everything, And if you see something on a screen that should not be there, call for help and do not engage alone. The rest is slow repair, and the knowledge that watching a blinking TV can be the start of something you don't want, so you learn how to stop it before it becomes worse. A week after I learned to lock the deadbolt without announcing it, the detective called. His voice was the same careful kind that people use when they have to tell you something that might be both good and only partly true. "We've got a lead," he said. He explained how a reverse image search had turned up a fragment, a cropped, fuzzy copy of the hallway photo on a forum used by people who buy and sell old camera gear. Someone there had posted a notice about a roll of film that matched a batch sold in my city the month before. It was a thread no sane person would follow, but the detective had followed it anyway. He sent me the link. I clicked and felt both relief and a new delicate fear that the internet could still be a place where pieces of me drifted, waiting to be collected. They traced the seller to a pawn shop on the edge of town. The pawn shop owner remembered a man paying in cash for a small point-and-shoot, a ragged jacket, a drawl that matched the detective's impression. Surveillance footage from the shop showed the man's back as he walked out. It wasn't the kind of proof that ends things in a neat way, but it was a place to start. I sat through the detective's report like a spectator at an assembly line. Parts moving, being catalogued, none of them meant to put me back together for good. He asked if I wanted to pursue charges. The question lodged in my throat.
Pursuing charges would mean court dates, testimony, another set of thresholds to cross with strangers watching. Not pursuing charges could mean the man stayed free, emboldened. I surprised myself by answering that I wanted to be informed, not to be a spectacle. "Notify me if it gets to a warrant," I said. "Don't make me go if we won't have anything solid." Weeks folded into one another. The detective called with updates in irregular bursts, a name that led nowhere, a jurisdictional holdup, then a small victory. Fingerprints from the pawned camera matched a profile tied to a handful of similar complaints in a neighboring district. The profile belonged to a man who moved often, preyed on anonymity. He'd never been high on anyone's priority list, but the pattern the detective described, photos, posts, trading images like trophies, fit like a key sliding into an old lock. It was enough, finally, for a warrant. When the facts came confirming an arrest, the words were mechanical and sudden, and then very human. The name on the paper was just a name. Hearing it aloud in my apartment made the room feel both smaller and safer. The detective offered to come by. I declined. I had built my safety measures to create quiet thresholds, not to let anyone else step over them for me. The man was arrested at dawn in a motel off the highway, one of those places that exist because someone needed to sleep between places. He had other charges now, trafficking images, possession of devices linked to assaults, things that made my story a small, visible piece in a larger ledger. The district attorney called me to say they thought the case had merit. It would move forward. The morning the arraignment report hit my inbox, I sat with a coffee that sat cold while I read and reread the documents. I felt a strange gratitude and a cautious emptiness. Gratitude that someone might be held to account. Emptiness for the realization that legal justice would not smooth the edges of what had been taken from me. Still, there was a change in how I moved through my space. The cameras in my doorway now served another purpose. Evidence could be preserved, dates could be recorded. There was a logic to it that my anxiety could live with. It did not erase the photo, but it meant the man who had made it could no longer live as easily in the margins. Therapy did the less tidy work. My therapist does not believe in heroic, single-sitting breakthroughs. She believes in the slow accretion of small acts, naming the fear, pointing out the pattern, measuring the panic until it loses its absolute authority. We talked about boundaries as if they were muscles. "You have to train them," she said once, and I pictured the worn bands of a gymnast's wrists, the careful rebuilding of strength after the body remembers how to trust its own limits. I learned to tell a different kind of story about myself.
Where I had once rehearsed the phantom logic of what I might have done differently, I began to rehearse what I did do. I sought help. I documented. I did not let embarrassment quiet me into silence. It was not grand. It was steady and pedestrian. It was the only kind of courage that seemed honest to my bones. Friends showed up the way friends do. Late-night texts, a casserole left at my door, a hand on the small of my back in the supermarket that was more like a brace than a touch. There were missteps, well-meaning people who wanted to fix me, people who spoke in platitudes, but there were also those who sat with me in quiet and let me decide how far to push the conversation. That was a blessing I had not expected. The people who could be present without needing to be busy with solutions. I took a self-defense class for 3 Saturdays, not because I imagined using a wrist strike, but because it helped me reclaim a sense of agency. The instructor taught where to kick if you had to, but also taught where to position your body to be seen, to be less vulnerable. Visibility is a tool, he said, not armor. The class met in a church hall stacked with folding chairs and smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old sweaters. I learned to place my keys so they could be gripped like a tiny weapon, to keep my phone in my hand rather than buried. These are frank, non-heroic practices, but they stitched something small across the hollow places fear had dug. There were nights when sleep refused me entirely. On those nights, I would sit on my balcony with a blanket and listen to the city's hum, letting it be a metronome for my breath. I learned to name the panic, not to fight it as if it were the enemy, but to catalog it, to talk to it like someone I had once loved and who had since become stranger. "I hear you," I would say aloud, and sometimes the panic was mollified by being acknowledged. The court case became another threshold. I sat in a room with fluorescent lights and watched the man stand, his shoulders narrower than I'd imagined, as if the part of him that once believed in escape now had to confront the practical registry of consequences. The prosecutor was steady and economical. The defense tried to narrow each photograph into a question of consent and context. In the end, the jury's decision felt both like a punctuation and like a comma. It closed a chapter on the legal front, but did not close the story in my chest. After the verdict, a conviction on several counts, I did not stand before the cameras. There were some reporters, their questions clipped, their interest a kind of heat. I declined comment. Saying nothing was, for once, deliberate. I wanted to let the legal outcome be what it was, without letting it be the headline of my life. The man's sentence did not dissolve the hours of replay, the small measures I had taken to construct openings that felt safe. But it widened the space I could live in without constantly rehearsing the worst. We spoke for a few quiet minutes about the pictures and about the small ways artists try to repair harm, exhibitions where proceeds go to subjects, collaboration on captions, the slow work of centering humanity over spectacle. He asked if any of the show felt too invasive, and I said that some of the work had the weight of confession, but not of violation, that I could tell where the photographer had stepped carefully and where he had not. When the crowd shifted and the conversation thinned, he said, "If you ever want to see the process, how I edit, or why I choose a frame. I can show you. Some of us are trying to make a practice of consent. The offer was simple. It was not a solution. It was a doorway. I accepted something that night, not a cure, but an exchange. He showed me a contact sheet and the small mathematical mercy of cropping, how a face could be seen differently when the margins were returned to it. We spoke about the people in the photographs who reclaimed their images and set terms, requesting a print, asking for a change in caption language, or refusing to be shown at all. He told me about a project where subjects annotated their portraits with words they had chosen to reclaim. The idea lodged in me like a seed. On the way home, I thought about ownership, about the way the city was composed of frames that were not mine, and how I might begin to set my own. It felt less like retribution and more like sovereignty. If a photograph could freeze a bruise on its first day, perhaps it could also be reframed to show healing months later. There was agency in the thought. There was labor, too, the careful labor of making choices with others rather than for them. Weeks turned to months. I began to write again. Small paragraphs at first, lists, observations, a line or two that I would not show anyone. Then longer notes, a small essay about images and consent that I left as a draft on my laptop, not because I intended to publish, but because the act of writing made the world feel less one-dimensional. I reached out to a couple of advocacy groups. I volunteered to read statements before public readings, to sit in on panels and speak when invited about the language people used when they recounted harm. My voice in those rooms was not a sermon. It was evidence, a witness that the visible world and the interior world spoke to one another. The detective wrote rarely after his email of thanks. Once he phoned me to ask if I would testify at a community forum on ethics in public photography. I said yes. Standing at a podium in a fluorescent-lit community center before a modest crowd, I told a story not seeking pity but clarity. I described the tightness behind my sternum and the nights when the photograph found me. I described the slow return, the grocery store where I could stand in the middle of the aisle and choose a can by color rather than by exit strategy, the tea warmed on the stove, the plant on the sill. I spoke, too, about boundaries.